Episode 30, Operator Syndrome. Last time we were talking about Steve's timeline. He was in the assaults division of the training department. A lot of good stories there. Well, some good stories, some not so good stories, but that's how it goes. And now I think we're leading up into your third platoon. So why don't you let us know how that came about?
Yeah. Well, it was when I was working in training department in assaults. A little aside, I had finally had time being assigned to training to be around the San Diego area for extended periods of time. Before that, I was just always on the road with a platoon, always training, always no predictability at all. So backing up to my first platoon in the Philippines, we had these we like to, we had a lot of time down on the weekends, and that's always trouble for guys who,
Hmm.
they're either going to drink or fight or get in trouble or fight each other. So we had these things on the base called smokers, where there's just a base gymnasium, and on Saturdays we would all just kind of go over there and just mess around. And there was one master chief named Steve Bailey, uh, not the same master chief as my friend Mike Bailey, but he was kind of into martial arts. He had done mostly have a kickboxing background. He was a big dude, and he would teach us stuff, because we were always wanting to refine our ability to defend ourselves if we were without a weapon, hand to hand kind of stuff. And this guy came. This other he was like a lieutenant or a lieutenant junior grade, I believe, which is like an O2, um, SEAL, and he's just a beast. His name is Colin Kilrain. He made admiral years later, but I knew him when he was just a swashbuckling O2, and he was an all-American wrestler for Lehigh University, and a big guy. He was strong, and he Bailey could pretty much kick everybody's butt. He was just pretty tough, and he had some martial arts background. He could hit pretty good. But all of a sudden, this guy, his nickname was Killer, Colin Kilrain, and he got a hold of Bailey and just kind of slammed him on the ground and got him in some funky looking choke. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And nobody could do anything with Killer. I mean, he was just part of that. He's an NCAA wrestler. You're not going to do a whole lot with a guy like that.
Right.
Anyway, but he took me aside afterwards and he said, listen, man, there's these guys from Brazil called the Gracie brothers, and they're just ridiculous. They have this jujitsu form that they've pioneered, and it's nuts. He goes, the guy I sparred with was Rickson Gracie. He goes, I couldn't do anything with this guy. He was just wiping the floor with me. And this is a guy who, he goes, nobody does that to me. I mean, he goes, I can hang with pretty much anybody. And he said, Rickson was just like spanking me like a little child. Like I didn't know what to do. And I was just tapping out left and right. So long story short, now this many years later, of course, everybody knows about the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu explosion.
Right.
But it was the Gracie family and the Machado family from Brazil, from Rio, who basically changed the face of martial arts. Because of ground fighting and being able to even the playing field with a smaller fighter, can handle at least a bigger fighter, given a skill set that maybe the other one doesn't have. So
Hmm.
I wrestled in high school along with playing football, so I always felt comfortable on the ground. But I started watching videos, and it was unbelievable. I was like, I have got to train with this guy as soon as I can. Nobody knew any of this back then. And Jocko Willink had a podcast where he had Rickson on there talking, and Jocko had a similar story. He trained with Steve Bailey too in Guam, I believe. He's a little later than my generation, but it was the same story. I mean, really the same story. So anyway, so in training department, I just cold called the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Los Angeles. Now I'm down in San Diego, so I was like, this is going to be. I mean, it's given traffic to get to Torrance, which is on the other side of LA from San Diego. It could be 3-4 hours, depending on the traffic. So they answered and they said, yeah, Gracie Academy here. I said, man, I just want to learn this stuff. I'm sold. and they were looking for students. I said, do you have anything closer to San Diego? So long story short, they said, yeah, there's one of our brothers is named Rickson Gracie. I'm like, Rickson Gracie, he's the champion of the whole family. I mean, he can beat all his brothers like with his one hand tied behind his back. He's just a phenom. I mean, arguably one of the, if not the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter of all time. He's got over 400 fights, no defeats. I mean, and he's fought everything, boxing, wrestling, you name it. So he answers the phone and he's like, yeah. I said, well, I'm a Navy SEAL and I'd really like to hone my combatives training. And he goes, yeah, I'd love to have you. Just come on up. And he was training down in Orange County, which is toward the south of LA. So it was only about an hour commute for me. So training department, I mean, they were behind it because it's gonna help me get another tool set. One of the reasons I liked it too is because it's a very gentle way of training. You don't have to punch people in the face over and over again and beat somebody's brains out. You can actually get them in a submissive position and with a choke or an arm lock, just say, all right, it's over. So uncle,
Right.
and you don't have to, because one of our missions in hostage rescue that always concerned me was if we go in there, we're trying to rescue these people. Well, there's something called the Stockholm syndrome where people their minds go a little bit wacky and they start to sympathize with their captors, and they might even be won over by their captors' ideology or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go in to rescue them and get the bad guys, save the good guys, you can have people resist you even though you're there to help them and save them and get them out of there. So my thinking was, I don't want to have to like whack them upside the head with the butt of my assault rifle and crack their head open. And now we got a bleeding situation. We're there to safely get them in our custody.
Mm-hmm.
And this looked like the perfect way to do it because you can subdue people without having to to take off the bloody violent aspects of some combat sports. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, started training with Rickson, and he is one of the I've never been with too many world class people in my life, like athletes or whatever, but he's one. I mean, he's world class, and there's nothing like training with somebody like that because I don't know, I've learned so many lessons from him, everything from humility to breathing techniques to, of course, the techniques of how to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the humblest guys I've ever met. It's incredible. He just, every time he sees me, he just gives me a big hug and it's like, hey, let's go cook some food and hang out and talk. And I spent the night at his house several times up in LA, watching fights, listening to him analyze these fights. But I have to say that was one of my all-time like high points in my training is just being able to train with a true master. I
What
mean,
did? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, that's it.
What did what did other SEALs think about? So this is sort of a new-ish
Yeah,
fighting style. It sounds like you were really going initially off of your own interests, just your own interests, and you were
yeah.
looking to pursue that. So what did other SEALs think about that?
Well, that's interesting. At first, they didn't. Nobody knew. Nobody knew anything about this, and it's just like everything. Oh yeah, you're just. I'm sure your master's the greatest, but it's like, no, man, it really is true. And so there were a couple of unbelievers. One guy was a black belt in Aikido.
Okay, yeah.
Another guy was um, a kickboxing PK. I forget what the association was, but he'd won the gold in the San Diego kickboxing tournament. So he was good. We Kickboxers are a little more realistic. A lot of karate martial arts are just kind of you go through kata, but you don't really fight.
Right. Yeah.
You just kind of go through the motions. Well, I mean, kickboxers say what you want. They can fight and they kick and they get hit and they're used to kind of like boxers taking a punch. So I said, all right, guys, I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you of this. Let's go to the gym and let's get it on. And both of these times I was getting to the point where I was almost a first rank blue belt, which it's like one documentary I saw was one of the guys who was the first American, one of the first Americans to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, said it was like everybody had muskets and we had an AR. It was like a secret way. You couldn't, I mean, if it's just the techniques, it's not, doesn't have to do with like I'm any tougher than anybody else. It's just
Right.
these techniques work, and they've been refined over generations, and you learn them and you're going to be a badass. That's all there is to it.
Hmm.
But not with that kind of, and the irony in it was that it brings humility. Like the toughest dudes I met there were no egos. The people with egos didn't last because you're going to tap out. You're going to get the wheels choked off of you. So if you have this thing where you're insecure and you've got to win every fight, you will not last in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because there's so many levels of just amazing fighters.
Hmm.
So yeah, I did twice, and I went with these guys like 3, 4, 5 times in a row. I said, hey, I'm gonna clinch with you, and I'm gonna take you to the ground. I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna do before I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna clinch. We're gonna go to the ground, and then you're gonna be lost probably, unless you have a wrestling background or something. And even then, wrestlers have the wrong reactions to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They want to turn their back, which means then you sink in the rear naked choke.
Right.
It's over. Because in wrestling, according to the sporting point system, you don't want to be on your back. But a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter is happy to be on their back. I mean, that's one of the safest positions called the guard, where you're on your back. And you can actually, I mean, I tapped out a big NCAA wrestler. He's 260. I was 160, and finally caught him in a guillotine. He was strong as an ox, but after a while, you get worn down. So there was all these, I told them what I was going to do, and sure enough, boom, we clinch, we go to the ground, they're flailing, they're choked, they're tapping. And like, let me try again. Let me try again. I'm going to be ready this time. Every time it was the same. So now I think by and large, I mean, the story is there. Like in the modern UFC, and that the Gracie family was part of that. Horion, one of Rickson's brothers, started the first UFC in Denver, Colorado in 93, I believe it was. No, 94, 93, 94. The first Ultimate Fighting Championship. And now, to this day, it's if you're going to be an MMA fighter, you've got to know what's called ground game. You've got to know either Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like at least on a black belt level or higher, or you have to be really strong NCAA wrestling background. You got if you're going to end up on the ground at some point in your career, and you got to know how to defend, as well as punch and kick and all that. So it's become a much more broad. The UFC is just you got to know everything now.
So
But back then, yeah,
so you first saw it in your first deployment. It sounded like that was 89-ish.
that was 89ish.
89. What year did you start taking it pretty seriously, going up and taking the classes? What year
Yeah,
would have that what 92?
92.
Okay.
92, I hit it hard, and then I ended up training with Rickson. I mean, yeah, for probably almost close to 10 years. Now I moved back to Kentucky, but I still went to his seminars. I still
Mhm.
went back to LA to train with him, and I had my own school at one point.
Wa-
So yeah,
was there a preferred combatives? Was combatives being taught at all in the SEAL
uh,
community back then? So was everyone sort of taking their own, choosing their own path, kickboxing
yep.
or whatnot? Okay.
Just doing that, there was no curriculum, and that's all changed. Even the Marine Corps has a belt system, kind of
Hmm.
combative system now.
Hmm.
But in some ways, it's kind of funny because if you think about it as a trained operator, and I know it's going to be very, very rare that we're going to have to go bare knuckles. You know, I've got a primary weapon. I've got a secondary weapon. I'm sure as heck not going to get into a scrap if I can just shoot somebody. It's going to save a lot of calories.
And you've got all your friends with
And
their
you
weapons as well, right?
exactly,
So
exactly. It's very unlikely that you're going to actually have a hand-to-hand situation. Like I said, I think the best application of it would have been trying to take custody of somebody you're trying to rescue or get under control, even perhaps a civilian who's resisting you, but you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to kill them or anything like that. So you can at least get them under wraps. So
Did you by the time you had rotated out, we're skipping ahead a little bit, but
yeah.
since we're on this thread about this, did you win some converts that day when you were cleaning up with those two guys?
Yeah, I did. One guy just said, he just kind of hung his head and he just still, I probably to this day still refuses to believe. But the other guy was like, I'm learning this. And then there were a couple other guys along the way that I was like, I was on the range one day. It was a break and we were just farting around or something. And this really big, strong dude was like, "You can't choke me out." I'm like, "Oh, maybe I can't, maybe I can." And I got him in a guillotine, and he's like, "Oh God, let go. Oh, you're killing me. You broke my neck." I'm like, you were pushing the button, dude. And there's a former PJ, Army or Air Force PJ, who was a Border Patrol agent at the time. One of my good friends, Brian Willett, and we got into a scrap in his living room. So I was telling him I was so excited. I was like, "Man, dude," and he was a big dude. He was a lot bigger than me. I'm like, "Man, I'm telling you." He goes, "Oh, all right, let's go." He's just alpha. He goes, "Let's go, let's go." I'm like, "All right, man, all right." We ended up knocking over half of his furniture in his living room. I get him in a real naked choke. He rolls like an alligator in a death roll and whacks his head on his mountain bike gears and gashes his head open. And because I was choking him, it's a carotid artery choke. There's no blood coming out. And he's like, "Okay, okay, okay." He taps, and I let go and just like,
Yeah.
because
Wow.
the
Yeah.
suction on his neck, he goes, "Damn it. All right, you got to drive me to the emergency room." I'm like, "All right, let's go, let's go." But
Did you?
he became yeah, he started training with Rickson too.
So did you see? So did you start to see? I mean, you're about to. So you're doing that while you're in the training department. You're about to go on your third deployment here. But did you start to see? It sounded you're winning some converts. Did you see the traction gain? Because um, I think I don't know that people associate SEALs with BJJ.
Right.
100, there's obviously a correlation there. I mean,
Yeah.
would you go so far as to say that maybe you were the one who introduced it to the teams?
Not really. I think Steve Bailey had to take credit for that because he had started training with the Gracies before me. He and Colin Kilrain introduced me to the Gracies. So,
Okay.
but I was really early. Jocko was after me, and but he had a very similar story on his podcast. And if you want to watch I don't know what it's the podcast where Jocko has Hickson on there.
Yeah.
He's talking about and Hickson had just written a book called Breathe. Uh, um, which is his kind of his autobiography. And Hickson mentions my name. I got my phone lit up. I just blew up from people all over the country. "Jocko, Hickson just mentioned you on Jocko's podcast." I'm like, "Well, it's my moment of fame, I guess." But it was kind of cool. But yeah, no, I think yeah, I was very early, and I was an
Hmm.
early advocate for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but now I don't think there's. In fact, when I was out at Dev Group, they have a place called Fight Club, and it's a
Nice.
whole gym. I mean, it's got a octagon, it's got mats, everything, bags, speed bags, and they've got a full-time guy there that he's an MMA dude, and he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And I was like, "No, no way." I just took my gi and went over and like, "Hey, you want to roll?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, sure." So now it's like it's kind of like a slam. Everybody wants to know it because it's good.
Well,
I mean, I
even
don't know about everybody, but
what I wanted to mention was so I'm thinking about I didn't do anything with BJJ, mixed martial arts growing up. I wasn't a wrestler, nothing like that.
mm,
But when I joined the army in 2005, I think even in basic training, so infantry basic training, and by 2005, there was some sort of ground fighting
mm,
combatives component to it. So that's where I was introduced to some of the basic,
mm,
positions,
right,
advantageous positions you don't want to be in, like being,
right.
having your back to the opponent. So very basic things like that. And then when I got to the Ranger Regiment, later I saw that it was a big thing there as well. So by then it had, up
Yeah.
through those years, it had come up to get to even with regular infantrymen, to be introduced to them in basic training. And we had, and it was a big, combatives was a big deal in the Ranger Regiment. And I know we had a few big name folks show up. One of them that I remember was in my company was Pedro Lacerda was his name.
It wasn't Pedro Sauer.
No, it was
Oh, okay.
Lacerda. It was
Okay.
Lacerda.
Okay.
And
Okay.
again, I don't now, and I didn't at the time know that much about the world, but he had at least enough of a reputation
Uh-huh.
about him and his skills and
Yeah.
coming up. And he showed up to our company like, hey, there's this dude who will like destroy anyone in
Yeah.
jujitsu.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, really? Okay, great, because I won't fight anyone in jujitsu, but good to know someone to stay away from, especially.
Yeah.
And he ended up actually passing away later.
Oh,
He ended up he went to school, got his TAP, did his combat deployments, but he was a RASP instructor, and he passed away then from some sort of health complication.
hmm.
But I, just to tie in, you saw the early days of
Yeah.
BJJ Jiu Jitsu ground fighting combatives.
Yeah.
And by 2005, they tried to make it mainstream, at least in the military. And then, of course, nowadays, everyone and your mother and child is doing BJJ nowadays. So it's
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah. Well, that was one of my early stories, and yeah, just fell in love with it and just got possessed by it. And but then I was still working and training, and then I guess circling back to just preface my first deployment or my third deployment. Uh, the guy I talked about who had a parachuting accident and was paralyzed was in a platoon that was only they were less than a month away from deploying when he got hurt. Now he was a parachute rigger, and that's a position that every platoon has to have a parachute rigger. It's just like we've talked about those check boxes you got to check because he's got to
Right.
pack parachutes downrange.
Hmm.
Um, and he was out of the game. I mean, paralyzed for life, sadly. So they had to fill that slot in that platoon pretty quick because they were deployed. Like I say, they were headed to the Philippines in a matter of weeks. So I remember, I'll never forget this day because I've talked about Mike Bailey. He's a Vietnam era SEAL, just a legendary guy within the SEAL teams from the Vietnam era. Hilarious guy, but also a master operator. Like he's really sharp. I mean, his brother was a physician and his dad's a lawyer. He could be in anything he wanted. He's just sharp, all the way around. And he was one of my former buds instructors, and I practically worshiped the ground he walked on because he was just like he was one of my heroes. That's no understatement. And he yeah, I remember he yelled across the grinder at SEAL Team 5. There's this big open tarmac space where most of the time we play volleyball when we have time off. And he goes, hey Steve, come over here. I'm like, hey Chief, what's up? Yeah. And he said, look, we're getting ready to deploy. You know what happened to Al. I'd really like you to be our rigger and come with us because you've had two platoons. You're up on everything. You don't need a whole lot of, you could fit in pretty quick. And I was just like floored. I was like, I mean, he handpicked me of anybody of that team. I mean, there were a lot of riggers he could have chosen, and I just thought, wow, to be in Mike's platoon. I didn't even have. I said, "Yep." When do we leave? When do you need my bags packed? And so that's how it was a sad note, but um, it was a great bonding experience. And with that platoon, Mike and I became like lifelong best friends, and we still stay in touch. And I'm hoping in future episodes on Operator Syndrome, I would really like to have Mike on to tell some Vietnam stories because we got to get this stuff on the books because it's going away, and he has so many just crazy stories that are fascinating, but also he's a good storyteller too. So hopefully we'll do that in the future. But yeah, so there I was. It was Golf Platoon was the name. We named our platoons in the phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, etc. So it was Golf Platoon, and the platoon commander was Colin Green, who is now a 3-star admiral. At least he might be 4 by now, at US SOCOM. And I've been in touch with him recently in emails. Just a really excellent officer, a Naval Academy guy. And he was my junior officer. He was the AOIC, the assistant officer in charge in my first platoon, which was Charlie platoon. And yeah, we're planning to catch up too. I don't know if I could rope him into an episode, but boy, he's got some stories. And he came to the fore in a couple of recent books, Code Over Country and Alpha, the story of Eddie Gallagher. Because he had to make some really tough calls as an admiral and stand down some stuff that was really going south. But we'll save that for now. But yeah, he was the platoon commander and really squared away. So I was so excited. I loved working at training, but I always wanted to deploy. I just wanted to be in a platoon with the guys doing the
Sure.
deed. So lots more to tell on that.
So what so stepping into, I know that the workup, the training cycle, that's big in terms of for multiple reasons, but one, the team gets to gel. If they haven't
Mhm.
worked together, they start to learn each other,
Yeah.
um, bond, as well as, sort of tactically understand each other, sort of serving the dual purpose.
Hmm.
So stepping in, you had two deployments, one of them a combat deployment, which was at that time relatively rare or
Yeah.
very rare.
Yeah.
So how did you feel stepping into that platoon with only a month to go?
Yeah, I felt pretty good. Part of it was being in training. I had just trained these guys in assaults,
That's
takedowns.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, I just worked with them in the kill house, so they knew me, I knew them. I I probably had a better feel for how they worked as a unit because I'm evaluating them and watching them than they even did because especially younger guys, you're just trying to focus on doing your little task in the moment. And I felt pretty comfortable. I think they liked me. It was a good platoon. As always, you've got to cast the characters, but pretty, yeah, mainline, good, solid platoon. Um, yeah, I fit in really well. Everything else, like diving, I was up on all of that, so it was
Hmm.
just a matter of, yeah, training with them, doing a little movement. I went on their field training exercise, the last one they did before they deployed, and I just moved right in. It was a helicopter flight up and hard target assault up Camp Pendleton, Marine Base north of San Diego. the yeah they yeah they lost their first platoon commander
Oh, okay.
who through a really how do we say an unfortunate incident that happened, that got into some legal hot water. um but I'll leave that. But
That's
then,
all you're gonna give us? You can't
well,
get it. How many
it
years has it been? I think we're safe.
okay, it had to do with a person who was in the Just Cause invasion,
Okay.
and this person had decided to appropriate some AK-47s and sneak them back and then sell them on the, basically, I guess you'd call it the, I don't know what kind of market, but it's an automatic weapon. And he ended up making a deal with a BATF agent. And
Selling AKs in the 90s, no less.
the
In the
90s.
90s, no less.
I mean, and it's like, of all the things, this is an officer who has a career on the line here. And how much did he get for it? Three, four, $500. I mean, it's like, that's, I don't know. So anyway, he was relieved of duty. And that's when we got Colin Green as our platoon commander.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, he wouldn't be the first or the last guy to sell
Right.
things that they acquired overseas. Even SEALs. I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
I think that's a headline from like the last 10 years. I think SEALs sell AKs across the board or something like that. It happens.
Yeah.
We've said it a million times. There are great guys and there are turds, even in the SEALs, even in the Rangers
Oh
and
yeah.
anything. So okay,
Yeah.
so there was a little bit of a shakeup. How long before the deployment was that shakeup?
It was real soon. It was like right at the wire. I mean,
Mm.
he had done he was on our field training exercise, the final one when we went up to Pendleton.
Oh wow.
And it was like, where did he go? And it was like, well, here's your new platoon commander, and it was Colin Green. It was like, whoa, it just happened so fast. Honestly, I don't know how to say this. I was thankful that it went down that way because Chief Bailey and myself both we had reservations about how competent this particular person would have been. It said some scary kind of sounding stuff that we were like, oh man,
Mm.
that doesn't sound like a good call. And just like we've said, there's great officers, there are terrible officers, and there's everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
But we had the feeling that, man, this is the kind of stuff that could get us killed or somebody killed. The kind of stuff we were hearing and sizing up. You're always sizing up,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what kind of commander is this going to be? Is he on some power trip? Like there's all these things that you study.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can say is thankfully we got Colin as our new platoon commander and we moved on from there. But yeah, that's I never even really thought of that because I was rolling in at the end of a training cycle and Colin was rolling in. I don't even think he was in a platoon. I think he was working in ops or something like that. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, you're the new platoon commander. So
I mean, well, certainly that's a vindication of your spidey senses, right? Like something's
yeah,
off with this guy, something's not
yeah.
right. But then what a greater lack of, leadership, obviously, but maturity,
Oh
ethics,
yeah.
morals, everything under the
The
sun.
whole thing. It's a
you
whole
know
package.
and it just doesn't make sense, and it's always the thing with those type of guys. It's just like things that just doesn't make any sense. Why are you
Why?
selling AK? Why are you throwing your career down the toilet for what? you know
Torpedo your career over a stupid AK. Really? Oh,
yeah, it's
yeah,
like
just good. Yeah.
you don't like, first off, you don't want to keep a couple AKs, some war souvenirs, like,
Yeah,
we're not supposed to do that either. You're not supposed to be
I know.
taking things, but I think that's enough of a common human instinct, right?
Uh-huh.
To want to
Sure.
have, so you could forgive it. You could be like, well, if you get caught, you're gonna screw
Yeah.
yourself, and that's a judgment call you're making. But no one gets hurt by doing that. But now you're selling AKs on, unless he had a bunch. I mean, I guess he was the
I no, it was one, I think, or well, the one he got caught with was one, but
well, and then who? I mean, the way these things go is you dig deeper. It's like, okay, now why is he doing something so
yeah, yeah.
so, was he got gambling debts? Has he got like what's going on where he's doing such a making rash decisions?
Mike Mike's father was an attorney, and Mike told him right away, he said, get an attorney and don't say anything to anybody. He was trying to kind of help him out. And right away he was like, oh, I told him, I started talking. He goes, have you ever heard of the right to remain silent? And he's like, oh, I outfoxed him. And he's like, oh, yeah, yeah. So it's stuff like that that we're like, oh, man.
I've got one. I'm not going to let the seals hang on this alone. I've got one very quick story. I'm not going to say any names. Mine's more recent, but we had some. There were some folks who were leaving our ranges with some goodies. They take little goodie bags of things with them. Rounds would be one thing, but they were taking
Uh-huh. Oh,
other
I know where
things
you're going.
with them home. And
Uh-huh.
I wasn't there to witness any of this, but I heard stories of federal agents dropping by, people hiding things in the woods. guys guys coming clean about it eventually, and being let go from the unit.
Uh-huh.
But those guys are in every unit.
What is it? What is it? It's not good enough that we can play with our toys on a range and blow things up and shoot. We've got to go a little extra. Yeah. I mean, I say we, but yeah, it's just so, yeah, it's those, yeah.
Okay, so we heard about how you were in the line to help BJJ get its roots into the SEAL teams. That was pretty interesting. How you got swapped over into golf platoon for your third one, and you're going to end up going to the Philippines, right?
Right.
So
Right.
you're
And just a kind of a teaser, it was, it, it was unlike any other platoon I'd ever done because it was mostly humanitarian relief. The week before our plane took off to head over there, just a couple day flight, Mount Pinatubo erupted, a huge volcano in the Philippines, and leveled Clark Air Force Base and put a serious smacking on Subic Bay Naval Base. So we did all kinds of humanitarian relief, cleanup work, even some life saving, and it was never had quite a platoon like that, but felt good about it in other ways because we were able to help out a lot. So
and I heard a little bit of this beforehand. So it's definitely some good stories coming out of that. So we'll pick up there in the next one. And until then, thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
see ya.